everybody, this is Kelly Holland from Divinity Designs. I'm here with Lisa Somerville and we are bringing you our Beautiful Backgrounds virtual event. In this video, we're going to cover our embossing folders and our stencils. Both embossing folders and stencils make wonderful backgrounds for your cards. Our first one up is the Flourishes embossing folder. And here we have it used on this tri-charter card throughout the whole card. Here we are in the bottom portion. This is our gift card pocket. You could put a gift card in there or a little note. So you could see what beautiful detail it adds to the card. Here's another one. Next we have our cross stitch. Beautiful little cross stitch pattern in there. Here it is on the background. This card was die cut, assembled, and then put through the embossing folder. It's a great mom card using the cross stitch embossing folder. Next we have fish. Great little fish pattern. Here's the fish pattern. Next we have two embossing folders. We have the Quattrofoil, which is just the Quattrofoil embossing folder. And we also have it with a matching die that coordinates with the embossing folder, another Quattrofoil pattern. So this one has the matching die. You can see the background. Another one with the matching die. And then this beautiful card. This was used on a nice pearlized cardstock. Real shiny. Lisa and I have covered our stencils quite a bit. We do have some further videos on our YouTube channel, and we can link some down below. And I'll show you some different techniques to using the stencils. But we're going to run through them and give you some card samples and some additional ideas. First we have the circles. This is a 6x6. You can see how pretty it is. You color coordinate background with the stamp set. You can make it very subtle or very bright. Here's our half shutter card. Here it is with a glitter paste. There's another half shutter. It's a great pop of color for a background. Now we have arrows. And here it's been embossed. You can see how it's raised because the stencil was embossed. Flower burst. Beautiful colors on this card. All stenciled on there. It's very pretty too. Nice little baby card. This one's very bright. And this one's using a metallic paste. Next we have petals. There's the petal background. This one's made a little bit more distressed looking. Very colorful. Another half shutter. Here in the center panel, they embossed it using an embossing plates. And here it's just used for a short strip. This one is roses. It's really pretty. What a great background that one makes. kind of subtle on this one, but you could see it on this panel here. Done with different colors. And this one's just so pretty. Next is half circles. And here was made and then die cut with a circle die for a nice little pop of color on the card. Here's just used through a template, just that little area there. Here's water spray. Look how pretty that is. That's just using our blending brushes and some inks. Here's a shaker card.
Hi, this is Lisa Somerville. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing our embossing folders and stencils along with the samples using these products. I'm here to share with you some additional samples using our embossing folders and stencils along with additional Divinity Designs products, and I'll also be sharing with you a closer look at our embossing folders along with some stenciling and embossing techniques. First, I'll be showing you the cards that I've created using our embossing folders and stencils along with additional Divinity Designs products, and then I'll be sharing with you just a few techniques using our embossing folders and stencils. Our embossing folders come in 2 different sizes. The first 3 cards I'm going to share with you all use the cross-stitch embossing folder along with additional Divinity Designs products. If you have any questions about the project shown in the video, you can use the leave a message button on our website to send us an email. Shown here is the slimline wood grain embossing folder. And now I have a few cards using the lattice slimline embossing folder. This is our pop-out card with layers die set. It does fold flat for mailing purposes and fits into an A2 envelope. Here's our fish embossing folder along with a couture collection and hunting and fishing vest die sets. And now I have a handful of cards that I'll use our Flourishes embossing folder. Embossing isn't just for cardstock. You can emboss your pattern paper to add texture. And now I'll share with you a closer look at cardstock that I've embossed using our embossing folders, and then I'll share with you a few techniques. Here's the Quattrofoil embossing folder on cardstock, the cross-stitch embossing folder, Flourishes embossing folder, fish embossing folder, cross embossing folder, and now we have our slimline embossing folders. This is the lattice embossing folder, wood grain, petals, and our newest slimline embossing folder, palm leaves. Again, embossing folders aren't just for cardstock. You can use them along with the pattern paper to add texture to the pattern paper. On this panel, after embossing with the Flourishes embossing folder, I used white pigment ink and swiped it over the top of the embossing. This will help define the embossing on the pattern paper. On these 2 examples after embossing on cardstock, I again used white pigment ink to add definition to the embossed areas of the cardstock. Now in these 4 panels, I used the wax paper resist technique along with our embossing folders. On these panels, I embossed the embossing folders on black glossy cardstock and then used a sanding block to remove the black cardstock from the embossed areas. This panel was embossed on white glossy cardstock, and then I went back and used our ink blending tools in ink to apply ink over the raised area of the embossing. There's 2 additional samples using the Flourishes embossing folder embossed on cardstock. Again, you can see white pigment ink was added and you get a different look on each piece. On these two cards, after using the water spray stencil, I did heat emboss one of our stamps on top of my stenciled area. Here's another card using the water spray stencil, and I'll show you just how easy it is to create this background later on in this video. And here's a Christmas card where I used our Petals stencil for a mixed media background for a Christmas card. Did you know that in addition to using your stencils for mixed media backgrounds, that you could also emboss your stencils so that they look like embossing folders? And here's a sample where I embossed our flower burst stencil on white cardstock. Again, to emboss your stencils, you'll simply switch up the sandwich stack that you're going to be using for your particular die cutting machine. When embossing my stencils, I like to use heavier weight cardstock, such as 110-pound cardstock. I have an acrylic plate on the bottom, my embossing mat, my cardstock, the stencil that I want to emboss, the clear shim. I'm also adding a metal shim, and then an additional clear acrylic plate. Now I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine. Again, you'll have to play with a different sandwich stack for your particular die cutting machine. And here you can see the stencil is now embossed into my cardstock. I'm going to leave that stencil in place because I want to add some coloring to the flowers. I am using some removable tape to hold the stencil onto the cardstock and then onto my work surface. My cardstock is cut larger than the panel I'm going to use, so it doesn't matter that the tape is covering part of the stencil. Next, I'll use our blending brushes and ink to apply ink over the stencil so that it adheres to the raised area of the embossed stenciling. You can then repeat that using additional blending brushes and ink. Remove the stencil from your cardstock and wash it with mild detergent and dry it and store for your next use. You can then trim that panel down and use it to embellish your card. Here's a few examples of some of our slimline stencils where I've dry embossed them. Here's the slimline diamond mixed media stencil, the slimline fishing net stencil, and here's two more examples using these two stencils. You can use our ink blending brushes to add color to a piece of cardstock, adhere the stencil over the colored background, and then use our ink blending brushes and black ink to go over the stencil. You can use Versamark to heat emboss using your stencils. You can do tone on tone using our ink blending brushes and stencils. Here's some stenciling done on black cardstock. You can also use our stencils with ink sprays, or try using some of our shape dies and just stenciling in the center of a shape. And this is the panel that I showed you earlier using our water spray stencil. I'm going to show you just how easy it is to do this technique using our stencils and ink blending brushes. So here you can see I have the water spray stencil taped over my craft cardstock. The craft cardstock panel is bigger than I actually need, so it's okay that I've added tape to the outer edge, as I'll be die cutting and embossing this panel later, so it'll cut off the edges. I'm going to use our ink blending brush and white pigment ink to add white pigment ink over the stencil. Continue applying the white pigment ink over the stenciled cardstock until the whole background is fully covered. After applying the white pigment ink over the stencil onto your cardstock, clean your stencil before using it again. Before moving on to the next step, you want to make sure that the white pigment ink is completely dry. You can either let that cardstock dry or heat set using a heat tool. Here you can see after cleaning the stencil, I've added the stencil back over the stenciled cardstock, shifting the stencil slightly. Now I'm going to take our ink blending brushes and colored ink and apply that over the stencil. This time I'm going to be working from lightest to darkest ink. Repeat that process with the ink in the ink blending brushes until your entire surface has been covered with ink. Then you can remove that stencil from your cardstock, clean it before storing it for its next use. Then die cut your panel and use it to create a finished card. You can see how adding that white pigment down first and then shifting your stencil adds some dimension to your background. For more inspiration using our stencils and embossing folders, visit the product pages on our website, like us on Facebook, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram.